Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ weekly webinar. I'm David Parsons, one of the vice presidents here at the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, welcoming you to today's program. And we've got a very good topic, a very hot topic right now, and a very excellent guest to discuss it. I just want to say before we start that this Friday is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, established by the United Nations and European Union, that at least once a year they stop and remember the great tragedy of the Holocaust. And of course, because of our partnership with Yad Vashem, because of our work with Holocaust survivors in Haifa, we just want to encourage everyone on Friday to take a moment, say a prayer, remember all the victims and the heroes of the Holocaust, and really consider what you can do to help those who survived it, the Jews who survived it, that we're helping here in Israel. But let's get to our hot current affairs topic on this week's show. It is, does Israel really need judicial reforms? Now, if you've been following the news here lately, you know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just returned to power after another close election. He got a very surprisingly comfortable support of 64 Knesset seats. They're forming a government. They've started rolling in a whole series of bills to solidify their position, including a number of laws, proposals for judicial reforms that are running into a lot of pushback from the opposition and from the left. And it's been very sort of shocking to see how fast this whole debate escalated. And today we're going to talk to Calev Myers, an Israeli attorney, about this. And Calev, he is a partner in Yehuda Raveh, one of the prominent law firms, one of the legacy firms here in Israel. He is the founder of the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, a public service law center here that helps provide services for those who can't afford it, and often dealing with public policy needs, freedom of religion, and such. And he was also a member of an international association of Jewish lawyers and justices. He was at one point deputy president of that organization, still a member of its board of trustees. So we're so glad to have you, Calev. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you, and thank you for your words at the beginning of this conversation about the importance of remembering Holocaust, the International Holocaust Memorial Day. Thank you for everything the International Christian Embassy is doing to continue the memory of the Holocaust, and also to continue connecting Christians from around the world to Israel and to significant causes like caring for Holocaust survivors. Yeah, so thank you for that. It's an honor to be with you today.
Before we get too deep in the weeds here, let me first say congratulations on your daughter's engagement. We've seen some photos floating around, and that's excellent. My son, of course, went to school with your daughter, and yes, and Noam, and congratulations as a father on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The most important thing is that we love her choice. Her fiance, Matthias, is a wonderful young man.
Yeah.
It's a great blessing just as a father to, when good people come to the life of your children. So we're very, very thankful.
As we say in the Old South, he's a good egg.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So Netanyahu, the new government, they take power. They quickly propose a series of judicial reforms that really has alarmed the left, and it's gotten to the point where even some high-tech executives here in the land, in some of these big global high-tech companies, their R&D centers here, are saying it's going to hurt investment in Israel, the judiciary changing so much, the courts, but please give us a sort of overview of how we got here, and then we'll sort of get into some of the details about why this is important and how it came about.
Yes. So first of all, I think it's important just to let's say 30,000 foot or meter view, whatever would be your preference, just to step back and recognize that the state of Israel is a liberal Western democracy by any reasonable basis or measurement. And within our democracy, we have a heated and very polarized political situation. It's different than the situation in the United States and other Western countries, which are also becoming much more polarized. You originally being an American, David, I was asking you 5 questions. What's your opinion on the right to carry guns, on tax reform, on the size of government, on the right to life and abortion, and let's say immigration? I would know very quickly which side of the map you belong to. That's becoming very, very polarized, and it's a true disagreements over policy that have over top of that an emotional aspect to it, which seems to be growing because of social network and the way things can sometimes be blown out of proportion in today's digital discourse, particularly. In Israel, it's interesting because 80% of the Israeli public agrees on everything when it comes to policy. There is no big polarization of policy. However, there is a polarization emotionally. And that comes down to why, because I guess Jewish people have to fight over something, right? We have, you have 3 rabbis and 12 opinions is the old joke. So politically, what everybody's fighting over today is yes, Bibi or no Bibi, and should he be our prime minister or not? But within the anti-Bibi camp, we have right and left, right? So it's still 80% of us agree on everything, and the question is who should be leading our country? Should it be Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu or not? And so that's really the issue now. What does 80% agree on regarding our conversation today? That we need legal reform. The last government, which is the anti-Bibi group, right, which was led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, everything they're saying that they need to do with these reforms in the justice system in Israel was something that Naftali Bennett said all the time. That if he has the chance, if you ask him, he wasn't able to be in power for long enough. But if he had the chance, this is what he was going to do. So. But it's now, of course, being blown out of proportion, in my opinion, by the anti-Bibi camp. And what complicates matters is our prime minister does have, he is sitting under trial for several criminal indictments. Now, like in Israel, like any other country, you're innocent until proven guilty. But he's in that trial now. And so the concern in the anti-Bibi camp is somehow they're going to leverage these, legal reforms within our system to help Bibi avoid, justice, which I think is inaccurate. If you really go down, and I hope we will have a chance here to actually look at what they're saying needs to be done in our legal system. None of it would directly affect Prime Minister Netanyahu's case. So I don't find that valid. And let me just speak into the issue of, are we going to lose business and lose investments in high-tech companies because of these legal reforms? I think that's a ridiculous claim. I think absolutely not. Netanyahu has said there are 3 reasons that every country today wants to do business with Israel: technology, technology, technology. And it has nothing to do. I just came back from a trip, David, to Bahrain, the UAE, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. These are countries that are not democratic, right? They're kingdoms, and they're authoritarian. Everybody wants to do business with them. All Western countries want to do business with them. You can go down and see all the Western construction companies that are building buildings in Dubai and building infrastructure. And I don't think that the world is looking with a magnifying glass on what's happening within the Israeli legal system, saying, "Oh no, I'm not going to invest money, if these reforms come through." I think that's something that the anti-Bibi camp is saying, or as because they're trying to come up with some kind of threat. But to me, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but you're saying there's basic agreement that 80% say there are some judicial reforms needed, but maybe Bibi and Aryeh Deri of Shas, maybe they're not the right ones to be doing it because they've got these criminal charges against them. That's
right. I think that's the big fear. But why does 80% of our country, in my opinion, right, based on what I've seen and over the last several decades, believe that we do need legal reform? The biggest issue is that we don't have a constitution. Our Declaration of Independence, it says that a Knesset would be formed and they would create a constitution and then create laws. But our first Knesset decided, instead of creating a constitution, they would start creating what we call basic laws, which are laws that your normal non-constitutional laws cannot breach. You have to create laws based on those basic laws, and slowly but surely. And then they said, eventually, after they create all these basic laws, they will come together, and each basic law will be a different clause in the Constitution. Okay, and so they created these basic laws. Until today, there are 13 basic laws. However, they never decided. It's never been explicitly stated how the Supreme Court could strike down normal laws based on basic laws. So the Supreme Court itself decided, very famous case by Chief Justice Aaron Barak, 1992, that it decided about itself that it has the right to cancel laws based on the basic law. The Knesset never decided that. It never went to a public discourse. These were the Supreme Court justices themselves that were basically giving themselves power. And now Esther Chayut, who's the current Supreme Court justice, in 2021 in another case said that the Supreme Court could actually strike down new basic laws. So basically what they're saying is, we are the last word on everything legal and everything legislative in Israel. And that is not a normal situation where
they're unelected. That's part of the problem.
They haven't been elected. Yeah, we can talk about how the judges are chosen. They're chosen by professional committees, and now they have the right not only to strike down laws, but to strike down basic laws, which are kind of like our Constitution. And the political system is saying, well, who gave you that right or that power, and how can you declare about yourself that you have this power? So we all know that we have to decide what the correct process is for striking down laws based on the basic laws, which will eventually become the Constitution. How can the Supreme Court do it? To what extent can it do it? Is their word final, or is there going to be an override clause, which is something they're discussing right now? But everybody understands this can't just be a court giving itself power, kind of ultimate power over our whole system, which would it's definitely a lack of balance in the separation of powers, or the balance of powers within a democratic system. So that's a very key issue that I think everybody agrees on. Yeah.
I think 1992, some of these legal decisions that you're talking about were sort of a tipping point that started upsetting the right about the court overreaching and
Yes.
Taking to itself powers that it isn't expressly given. But I want to go back to 48 and this decision not to have a constitution, a written document to set out checks and balances, like the United States, like so many other countries. I don't know if you call it an urban legend, but the common explanation I always heard that it was the ultra-Orthodox who said, no, the Bible is our constitution, the Torah, the books of Moses, we shouldn't have a constitution. But I understand it was actually Ben-Gurion himself who didn't want this. There was a very good explanation about it a week ago by Haviv Rettig Gur, a reporter, an analyst, senior analyst for the Times of Israel, that really set out why he didn't want this. He saw Roosevelt being tied, his hands being tied by the US Constitution at the time for many years. So he was going to pack the court and do different things. And he said, we don't need, Ben-Gurion said, we don't need some rigid document because we are a progressive society, we're a model socialism, and we're going to do things right, and we don't need something really tying our hands.
Right. Well, I think both are true, David. I think that David Ben-Gurion, who is if I was sitting in one of my other offices, you would see a picture of him behind me on my wall. I mean, he's somebody that I have highest respect for. He's been an inspiration in my life in many ways, and just a great, because he's a thought leader, a thinker. He saw and planned for the future, and he lived in modesty. And you look at the leaders of the nations around us and the way that their founders or leaders live in complete opulence when most of their people are in abject poverty. David Ben-Gurion was the opposite.
Man of the people.
Right. He's a man of the people. He passed away in a small shack down on a kibbutz, as a member of a kibbutz in the Negev. I mean, while our country enjoyed all the benefits of growing wealth and prosperity and everything. However, David Ben-Gurion, he famously said, it doesn't matter. He said, it doesn't matter what the people ask for, it matters what they need. In other words, I know what everybody needs. Something I come with a strong leader. And you're right, he didn't want his hands tied with the Constitution, because it might have limited his power to decide what the people need. Okay. So, but at the same time, I think the ultra-religious supported that as well, because Israel is a very interesting it's a very interesting democracy, because it was declared as a Jewish and democratic state. And so in most democracies, you have complete separation of religion and state. And that's kind of part of how democracies developed, after the French Revolution, the American Revolution, etc. Israel's a little bit different, because it's a homeland for Jewish refugees from around the world. And if you're suffering from anti-Semitism anywhere in the world, there is one country where you can come and be sure that you'll never have anti-Semitism. For that reason, we need to maintain a Jewish majority now. And so there is a little bit of friction between being a democratic state and a Jewish state, and the religious factions in our Knesset are concerned about that. And if we have a super democratic secular constitution, will that somehow limit the Jewish character of the state? Now, in my opinion, there isn't a conflict between being a Jewish and democratic state, because it's like saying that a tree is both tall and green. There are two different ways of measuring this. So democracy is a form of government. Judaism is a religious culture, right? So our form of government is democratic for every intent and purpose. For that reason, we should have a constitution, in my opinion. But our religious culture is Jewish. Our national holidays are Jewish. We have the Star of David on our flag. In our national anthem, we talk about the longing of a Jewish soul for a homeland. I mean, this is our religious culture, right? It's two different things. But however, there was concern at that time, and there's still concern today within religious circles, that if we have too much of a secular constitution, that might compromise in some way the religious or conservative, religiously conservative character of our state. And so I think it was Ben-Gurion and the Haredi factions together that decided to kick the can down the road instead of creating a constitution.
Okay, well, I think you hit the heart of it there with this debate between this tension between a Jewish and a democratic state. I think you gave a good explanation. We're still at the founding of Israel. Rather than a constitution, you go ahead and you set up a Knesset. It's a parliament with only one body, unicameral. There's no upper and lower house to sort of balance them. It's sort of, because the British had a mandate there, it's sort of based on the British constitutional monarchy, but rather than a queen or king, you have a ceremonial head as president right, with limited powers, and they just try and keep everyone, try and go for social cohesion and really lots of tribes in Israel. And then the judiciary, which, as you said, it sort of started cutting its own rules, because there was very little to tell it exactly its limits. But these basic laws, when you say basic law, it was meant to be part of this skeleton of maybe a future constitution.
That's right. Yeah.
But did they require a super majority to pass and a super majority to amend in the Knesset?
Well, that's one of the problematic issues, that they require a supermajority to amend, but they were not passed with a supermajority. So
they have to have at least 61 votes that's a basic law. Yes,
a real majority. So it's not, you have 50 members of a certain plenum, and a majority of them can overturn. No, it has to be a real majority, 61 votes to change or overcome a basic law. And they're different than other laws, because they talk about basic principles, right? They don't go into detail, right? And like a law would. And so yes, that is one of the issues, that they do take a supermajority to change, but they didn't necessarily take a supermajority to create. And so that is a challenge within our democracy. I also say, yes, we are a parliamentary system. One of the other challenges, David, is that in many countries it's very clear you have an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch. In Israel, normally all of the ministers of the government are members of Knesset. They're elected as members of Knesset. Now, what happens today? Actually, today we have Ron Dermer, who's what's called a professional appointment. So he's the only one who's, out of the 30-some ministers was not elected to the Knesset. What we have today is we go according to the Norwegian model, which as soon as the government is elected, the members of Knesset that become ministers then resign from their seat in the Knesset, and other people from the list are bumped up, right? So, but they were elected in Knesset elections. They're, obviously, accountable to the political party and the leader of their political parties. So there isn't a clear separation between the executive and the legislative, like in some countries, which means it's like you have, instead of 3 branches of government, it's kind of like 2 or 2.5, right? So you have a very strong kind of legislative and executive that are mashed together in a way, and then you have the judiciary. So obviously this big this discourse regarding how much power goes to the legislative / executive and how much goes to the judiciary, it becomes all the more intense and emotional, and people feel like it's high stakes because that is kind of the only other branch of government, the judiciary, and what the anti-Bibi camp is saying is what they're just trying to do is give a disproportionate amount of power to the executive / legislative, so they'll be able to do basically whatever they want, and there won't be proper judicial review over them. So that's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in Israel's defense, they may not have a constitution. A lot of Western democracies, they have constitutions that a new government gets elected and they discard the old one and pass a new one. But Israel does have these basic laws that you have to go to extra lengths to change it, just like the American Constitution. Yes. You need so many states to ratify. Yes. And Israel's system isn't that different than, say, Britain, where you have the 2 houses in Parliament. And out of the House of Commons comes the government and the prime minister.
Yes, and also it's very important to state that Israel has a very strong rule of law. Nobody is above the law in Israel. And as we're speaking, and as the anti-Bibi camp is out in the streets demonstrating about these judicial reforms and so on and so forth, he's still under trial. And he appointed Aryeh Deri to 2 ministerial positions, plus made him basically a deputy prime minister, and that went to court. And our Supreme Court said that that wasn't possible because he's somebody that has been that's not just been indicted, but actually convicted of crimes. It was basically tax evasion and embezzlement, which would prevent him from being a minister. And so our prime minister dismissed him or told him he needed to step down. And so, yes, we don't have a perfect, let's say, separation of the 3 branches of the government. It's a little bit different than the United States or Great Britain, but we have a very strong rule of law and respect of law from our senior leaders in Israel. So we should be thankful for that.
Yeah. So it was in 1992 where the judiciary started becoming more activist. And started to erode away or draw to itself more power. And it had to do with Aryeh Deri, where the first time he was convicted of fraud or embezzlement. And he actually was in the government of Yitzhak Rabin from Labor, from the left, and supporting Oslo and all. But he got... he was going to have to step down because he had been, as a minister, because he had been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, going to have to serve in jail. And the question was, when did Yitzhak Rabin have to dismiss him, just like Bibi just dismissed him? And the court intervened and said, you got to do it now because that's what a reasonable prime minister in a Western democracy would do. And the court started looking at other Western democracies and sort of borrowing from their traditions. I mean, declaring laws unconstitutional when you don't have a constitution, or declaring government decisions like when to dismissed the area as unreasonable. And I think this was a turning point in this battle from 92 forward. You mentioned another incident from 92. What was that again?
Yeah. There was a very there's a very well-known yeah. So in 1992, there was actually, when I was at law school, David, it was very interesting. I remember learning these decisions by the Supreme Court, and actually our own Barack's big kind of manifesto, where he declared that the Supreme Court could strike down laws based on and being unconstitutional. That was actually in a case that had nothing to do with those questions. It was actually a banking dispute, and the judges got into this discussion between them. All of a sudden, you have, I forget, it was like 50 to 100 pages of this decision that kind of went into the constitutional powers and everything, and it was very interesting. And then based on that, they made the decision regarding dairy that brought in kind of the test of reasonableness. And this is another thing that they're looking at. And our Justice Minister Yariv Levin says he wants to cancel the grounds of reasonableness, because basically, the Supreme Court basically decides that it has the ability to strike down a law. Then it decides it has the ability to strike down a basic law, but then it says, okay, in interpreting this law, we will interpret it based on the most reasonable interpretation, the most reasonable thing that government should have done based on this law. Okay, so, but when you have a situation where judges are appointed by the judicial system, so you have a 9-person, all judges in Israel are appointed by the same committee, the lowest, so our local courts, our district courts, and the Supreme Court, there are 3 levels, all of them are appointed by the same 9-person committee, which has 2 ministers, 2 members of Knesset, so that's your political representation. Then it has 2 members of the representatives of the Israel Bar Association, and 3 judges on the Supreme Court, including the senior justice. So basically 5 out of the 9 members of this committee are not politically elected. They're not part of the political system, and they're lawyers and judges. So basically what people are saying is you have all the judges are appointed by their own colleagues. They have this enormous amount of power, and they decide what is reasonable or not reasonable and so you have a very small part of the population that decides that something the government does is reasonable or not based on their own subjective culture and values and everything else. And so it's the system that it kind of what's the right word? I'm sorry. It's the word I'm looking for.
Themselves, they're self-regulating, but you
Yeah.
can't really trust them. Here you've got unelected officials overriding government decisions of elected officials who are answerable to the people.
Right. It's a system that's perpetuating itself, basically.
Self-perpetuating.
I'd say that that issue of reasonableness to me is I don't buy it that removing the grounds of reasonableness will somehow greatly limit what the courts can do, because there are many grounds. There's another ground in which we call Hebrew midatiyut, which is like it's like proportionality. It's basically a kind of a different way of saying the same thing. But okay, you as a government leader made this decision based on this law. Was that the most proportional thing you could have done given the situation? Were you too heavy-handed given all the tools you could have used by law? Maybe there was one that would have created less damage or been, it would have been more proportional. But so let's say they get rid of grounds of reasonableness, then they'll use grounds of proportionality. I mean, judges are very, very smart people by nature, most of them, or they wouldn't be there. So I don't think that I see that more as arguing over semantics than something that'll have a profound effect on the way our courts make decisions, honestly.
But you've got this situation now where any citizen, and there's a whole group, a whole lot of organizations, movements, whatever, that file these petitions. Any citizen can do it, but there's a lot of money behind these groups that monitor the government all. And anyone can petition the high court, the top court, top appellate court. There's no more avenue of appeal. You appeal straight to them. The prime minister just made a bad decision, and the court decides whether to take it, but they can take a decision and immediately override something the prime minister did based on what it was reasonable. And that, I think, is part of what needs to be fixed here. Yes,
I think that you're hitting on another issue that everybody, like this is 80%, right, agrees it needs to be fixed. And, so take the United States, let's say they have some 400 million odd citizens, something like that. Okay, their Supreme Court in a good year might hear 60 cases. And take the state of Israel with 9 million people, and our Supreme Court here's thousands of cases a year, sometimes up to 10,000, because everybody has on basic government decisions, everybody has direct access. Now, I, as a civil rights lawyer, have taken advantage of that and appeared before the Supreme Court, I don't know, 26 times or something like that. But because on issues, say it's an immigration issue, who is a Jew for the purpose of the law of return, these kind of cases I've handled, well, that was a decision that was made by the Ministry of Interior. So boom, you go up to the High Court of Justice, which is basically the Supreme Court sitting as a quasi-constitutional court. But that's one of the things that everybody understands needs to be reformed. Like the Supreme Court shouldn't be hearing that amount of cases. There should be a better filtering system, so within our, of appeals, or maybe another level. When our district court is sitting as a court of administrative issues, which are governmental issues, before you go to the Supreme Court, it's obvious to everybody that there's something here that definitely needs to change. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the Minister of Justice, Levin, has proposed, first of all, we're going to make sure the majority of people who sit on this committee that select the judges are from the Knesset or are appointed by the Knesset, so that they can have some accountability to the people through these elected officials. Yes. And is that a good move? Do you think that helps correct some things? I know that Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked over recent years, even in the last government, was making sure there were more conservative judges appointed. And we even saw that in the Derry decision, that even though they agreed Derry needed to step down, the conservative judges did it on a separate basis than reasonableness. They thought that was too, a stretch too far.
Look, David, I immigrated to Israel from the United States. From an American perspective, what is in counties and in some states, judges are actually elected by general elections, and our Supreme Court judges, of course, are chosen by the president and confirmed by the Senate, which is a very, very political process. So, I think the disadvantage of the current system is that we all know that everybody has a political view on life and on everything. But when you say, well, this is a professional committee, it's not a political committee, our judges are appointed by professional people, then I'm not sure that's 100% genuine. And what that does is it undermines when you have a certain amount of when most of the judges that are appointed end up coming from the same law school, let's say, or coming from a similar ethnic or religious background, because the judges and the lawyers that appointed them are from that same majority, then there are sections of our population that don't feel comfortable with that, because they feel like, well, this is a little political society, which is, again, self-perpetuating, and so I would prefer to call the child by its name, and say, okay, there is politics and everything, so let's. So in other words, I don't think it's the end of the world that they'll tip the scales a little bit and maybe make it 5-4, politically elected people instead of 4-5, and so there's more involvement and people understand, yes, it is it is affected by politics, and we're not ashamed of that, and it'll be more similar to the system in the United States. So I'm not concerned about that personally. Also, I've seen the way it works in the United States, and I mean, you can. if you're a Democrat, you're not very happy with the recent appointments of President Trump in the Supreme Court, but it's part of the political system. And you also know that when your party wins, you'll have the same opportunity to do the same thing. So everybody feels like they're part of the conversation, and if they win in the elections, then they will have more effect over those decisions, rather than keeping it as this kind of this closed guild legal guild that perpetuates itself. The lawyer inside of me might think that's a wonderful idea, but the citizen inside of me is kind of scratching my head. I don't know if that's the best way to build broad public confidence in the system and the process. So
the political pendulum always swings left
yes.
and right. It's been swinging much to the right in recent years, especially since the second intifada and the collapse of Oslo. There are a lot of people more, say, hawkish, they're more conservative on security and a lot of other issues.
Yes.
But this thing of a Jewish and a democratic state, I think it's fair to say that a lot of conservative, traditional Jews here who vote for Bibi, who vote for Shas, and the religious Zionist parties are in government now. They have wanted to put more of an emphasis on the Jewish side of this. And this is why the nation state law of the Jewish people was passed a couple years ago. That was an early indication of just how much the right was trying to bring a balance to this. Whereas on the left, I've even heard some of the say Meretz or other members of the left, the liberal parties in Israel, they say, I'm a citizen of the world first, and then I'm a citizen of Israel. That this whole what we call the scandal of particularity, that to say, I'm Jewish first and then I'm this or that. They want they have an idealistic view of democracy. It's very liberal, it's very pluralistic.
Yes, I think so. We started this conversation by saying that 80% of Israelis agree on all policy issues. Okay, that's basically because the right won on all the issues. So on the economic issues, the beginning of the state, the right and left was determined based on economic issues. You had the big kibbutz movements, which were very socialist and communal, and that was David Ben-Gurion's party. We would consider that to be the left today, very socialist. And then the right was more the free market, Zionist. At the end of the day, the free market people won, and kind of their crowning event was when Bibi Netanyahu became Minister of Finance
Under Sharon. 2002 or so.
2002, and he pushed through all these reforms, and he broke up the big government monopolies, and he created a free market, and he, and nobody, even on the quote unquote left today, is still in the far socialist camp. Like everybody says they believe in free market today. So so the right won. And then if you look in the 90s, it was the peace camp against the hawkish camp. And do we want to create a Palestinian land? Should we do land for peace? Should a Palestinian state be created? The Oslo Accords, etc. Again, the right one. 80% now are kind of say, okay, we don't really want a Palestinian state because every time we give away land, they're shooting more rockets at us from that land. And today it's Abbas and tomorrow it's Hamas, and that could be an existential threat to us. At the same time, we don't just want to annex everybody and take responsibility for several million Palestinians who don't want our administration. So let's give the Palestinians the highest amount of autonomy as possible while we're managing the conflict without declaring a state for all intents and purposes. Like 80% of Israelis would agree to that. Okay, so basically, if the right won, both on the economic issues and then on the peace issues, what is left to fight about, right? And what you're seeing now is it's the issues of religion and state. Like like for instance, the reason that we went through 4 elections in 5 years was because Avigdor Lieberman did not join the Likud and Haredi government in, I think it was 2017, and it was like I think maybe the coin dropped, and he understood, well, the right one on all these issues. So why am I sitting with these ultra religious in the same government when the people who are voting for me want to eat pork and drive cars on Shabbat? Right? So either these are not my people, and so that actually threw our political system into well, the rest is history. But so these are the hot topics now, and this will define the Israeli political system moving forward, I think, particularly in the post-Netanyahu era. Right now, they can still argue, yes, Bibi, no Bibi, but, may God give him a long life, and he might be with us for many more years. I don't know, but that's where we're heading. I think these are going to be the big issues. The balance between religion and state that's where everything, those are the big issues of our day.
I think that those were terrific insights, Calev, that we have a lot of agreement on this. I wrote a piece, I guess about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where it was clear Bibi had lost one of the recent elections, and it wasn't quite, writing his epithet, but it was a piece I did called "The Knock on Bibi" and how the left hates him for destroying the dream of their dream of a perfect socialist state by the free market, being the free market champion, destroying their dream of peace by sort of slowing down Oslo in the mid-90s, and now all that's left is their beautiful liberal democracy, and this is why the left hates him so much. And you hit all three of those on the head here, so there's a lot of agreement between us. I want to start wrapping up here by bringing in President Isaac Herzog, who we've had a good relationship with him. He was a member of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. When he first got into the Knesset, he was very good to us as Minister of Tourism, came to our feast and spoke. And then as chairman of the Jewish Agency, we've seen this guy in action. He was very, very friendly, warm, and cooperative at the Jewish Agency, and thanking us and other Christians for all the help with Aliyah that they do, bringing Jews back to Israel. And now as president, he seems to have a good sense of the office. His father was president. He has a sense of national responsibility. He's playing this figurehead role to always try and keep the peace. What role does he have in this? And is he going to step in now and help work out some sort of compromise on what these shape these judicial reforms should take?
Yeah, I mean, the president in Israel basically has two executive powers, and that's, after elections are finished and the votes are, counted and tallied up, he decides who should get the first shot at, putting together a coalition government. And so that's the main executive power he has. Besides that, he also has power to pardon people, criminals, judicially, like the presidential pardons in the United States. So what effect will he really have, kind of at the very practical executive level on this issue? I think because he is a public figurehead, I think correctly compared him to, let's say, the king or queen in Great Britain, although he wouldn't have that type of old wealth or high net worth wealth to name, but a public figure that everybody respects, that is ceremonial and so on and so forth. I think right now he's doing everything he can to kind of bring the flames down and in the public discourse and create more understanding and so on and so forth. So I think he could be like an arbiter in this situation, but it's to the extent that both sides respect or recognize him in that position, because he doesn't have any authority by law to do that. But he is a very fair-minded person who definitely has public trust, and so I think he could be helpful at creating more discourse. I'm seeing, by the way, some positive developments where even members of Knesset from Bibi's party are saying, well, we should listen to what the opposition is saying, and maybe we need to temper a little bit the various clauses of the reform and try to come up with something that has a broader consensus. I think they're looking at all the people who are out protesting in the streets and saying, well, let's do this as much as we can within political discourse and not just, so it doesn't feel like they're just steamrolling the system. They could. I mean, they have a clear, 64 out of 120 seat majority that's very, very cohesive ideologically, and so they could just push this through without listening to the opposition. But I think they want more of a conversation in order for the public to feel more comfortable about what's happening. So I'm glad to hear those voices. David Bitan is somebody who said that recently on the radio, and there are other voices like that of members of Knesset from the Likud. Danny Danon said that. I heard him on the radio yesterday. Our former ambassador to the United Nations. We need to talk about this with the left, talk about it with the opposition, listen to what they're saying, take it into consideration before we make the final decision. And I would just say to anyone out there who's watching, all of our viewers who are watching what's happening, I would say the most important thing is just to wait and see what the final result is, right? I don't think I think both of us would agree, David, that none of these reforms we're talking about are going to destroy Israel's democracy. But we're not even sure exactly what is going to be the final result of this whole process, right? So let's wait and see. And you mentioned people say, oh, this is going to ruin the investments in foreign companies in Israel. I don't think so, and certainly not before you see what the final result is. Let's wait, let's see. For those of you who pray, for Israel, pray that our leaders will have wisdom. We know we need judicial reform, and so that the result of all this will be good for Israel, good for all the people of Israel, good for minorities in Israel. So I think it's. These are great questions, but there's still a lot up in the air until the final reforms are passed.
Yeah. Well, look, I tell you, there's been the way this escalated so quickly, and the return of the Black Flag protests. I think they now call them Black Robe protests against Bibi and these reforms. It almost makes like the 3 years of political deadlock, all these elections, almost makes it look like the good old days. But it's
right.
A lot of vitriol, a lot of heated rhetoric, but underneath of it is a good, healthy debate. You're saying about there is a need for judicial reform. Yes. Yeah. And I think you've been very helpful in reminding us and establishing that Israel is a democracy. And I think the one point about professional self-appointing their own, you have this problem, maybe all the skull and bones guys at Yale are appointing each other, right. that I saw one report or several reports that there's no other Western democracy out there where all the judges and lawyers appoint themselves as judges. That nearly in every case, parliaments are much more involved, or executive or executive branches much more involved. So, making a change here in Israel is not that big a deal, but the changes are needed. I think the problem some on the left have is that the guys who are in charge of this right now may not be the right ones to do it, because Bibi is on trial for corruption. R.A. Dairy, head of another major partner in the coalition, is now having to step down as a cabinet minister because he just did a plea deal for tax evasion. Yeah. So, but I hope people are understanding the debate here. Israel is a vibrant democracy. Any closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, again, I would just say I would sum it up by saying let's wait and see. Like you said, Israel is a liberal, Western, thriving democracy that with strong rule of law that needs some legal reforms, and we're in that process right now. It's very heated. There are a lot of people in the anti-Bibi camp that are very concerned that somehow this will be misused. It doesn't look like that's happening right now, but let's pray that the process will go through well, and at the end of the day, the result will be something that's good for Israel and good for all of Israel's citizens. So, that would be my summary: to wait and hope and pray.
Okay, we want to thank Calev Myers, an attorney with the prominent Israeli law firm of Yehuda Raveh, and a good friend of the Christian Embassy. We thank you for your time and your expertise, Calev, and blessings to you and your family and the wedding to come.
Thank you very much.
We just want to thank everyone again for tuning in for the ICEJ weekly webinar. It's been great to have you. I hope you learned a lot, got a lot out of this. Hope it helps you to pray for Israel and what they're going through right now, but things are going to be good. God's hand is over this nation. Just remind you, next week we'll be back with another weekly webinar on Thursday. We also have our global prayer gathering next Wednesday. Please join us then. We're going to have a special 1-hour global prayer gathering, praying in the Shomron. We're going to be up on a visit during our Envision Pastors and Leaders Conference up at Ariel University. They're hosting us for the afternoon, and we're going to pray to the Lord from the heart of biblical ancient heartland from the Samaria, the Shomron. And please join us then. Of course, there's still time to join our online Envision Pastors and Leaders Conference next week from Monday through Thursday, Possessing the Land of Promise. And final program note, please take a moment to remember the victims and heroes of the Holocaust on Friday. It's January 27th. It's International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Don't let it pass without saying a prayer to the Lord for Israel, for the Jewish people, for those who lost loved ones, for Holocaust survivors, and really even going online to read something about it or watch a movie about the Holocaust, a documentary or something to educate yourself better about this unique tragedy and how the Jewish people in the proof here in Israel have overcome that. So we thank you and God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next Thursday at 4 p.m. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on our social media pages for more exclusive ICEJ content.